Nobody believed in you. Not at the beginning. Not when you had nothing to show. Not when all you carried was a dream too heavy for your hands. They didn't say it out loud at first, but you felt it. You felt it in the silence when you spoke about your goals. You felt it in the forced smiles. You felt it in the way conversations changed when ambition entered the room. They looked at your background, your situation, your limitations, and they quietly decided what you could never become. They judged you by where you started, not by how far you were willing to go. They didn't know how many nights you lay awake staring at the ceiling, fighting battles no one saw. They didn't know how many mornings you woke up already tired, already doubting, already scared, but still stood up. You didn't come from comfort. You didn't come from privilege. You came from pressure. And pressure either crushes a person or turns them into something unbreakable. People love supporting success, but they hate supporting potential because potential requires patience, and patience is rare. When you said you wanted more, they called it unrealistic. When you refused to settle, they called it arrogance. When you chose discipline, they called it obsession. They told you, be normal, be safe, be realistic. But what they really meant was, don't outgrow us. Nobody believed when you chose the hard road. Nobody applauded when you sacrificed comfort for growth. Nobody stood beside you when the journey got lonely. And it got lonely, very lonely. You watched people quit. You watched people laugh. You watched people live comfortably average lives while questioning why you were choosing pain. And sometimes, you questioned it too. There were moments you almost gave up. Moments you stared at the mirror wondering if they were right. Moments where quitting felt easier than continuing. But something inside you refused to die. A voice that whispered, not like this. Not here. You didn't come this far to stop now. You kept moving even when progress was invisible. You kept working even when results were silent. You kept believing even when belief hurt. You trained while others slept. You studied while others scrolled. You built habits while others made excuses. And still, nobody believed. They only saw failure. They only saw struggle. They only saw delay. They never saw discipline forming. They never saw resilience being built. They never saw strength growing quietly in the dark. You learned how to stand alone, how to move without applause, how to trust yourself when no one else would. Rejection became routine. Doubt became normal. Loneliness became familiar. But instead of breaking you, it shaped you. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped announcing your plans. You stopped looking for approval because you realized something powerful. The people who doubt you today will never understand the strength it took to keep going yesterday. So you suffered in silence. You worked in shadows. You grew where no one was watching. And slowly, without noise, without validation, you changed. Not on the outside at first, but inside. Your mindset sharpened. Your discipline strengthened. Your standards rose. You learned that motivation fades, but discipline stays. You learned that talent is common, but consistency is rare. You learned that belief doesn't come before results. It comes after them. And that's when everything shifted. Something changes in a person when they stop waiting to be believed. It doesn't happen loudly. There's no announcement, no celebration. It happens quietly, internally. One day, you wake up and realize you're tired of explaining yourself, tired of defending your dreams, tired of shrinking your vision so others feel comfortable. You stop asking, what do they think? And you start asking, what must I do today? That question changes everything. Because when you stop chasing validation, you start building discipline. And discipline is dangerous. Discipline doesn't care how you feel. Discipline doesn't wait for motivation. Discipline shows up when comfort begs you to stay home. This is where you changed. You didn't suddenly become confident. You became committed. You didn't eliminate fear. You learned how to move with it. You didn't wait to feel ready. You acted anyway. Day after day, you repeated the work. The boring work. The lonely work. The work nobody claps for. You learned to fall in love with the process, to respect the grind, to trust time. While others searched for shortcuts, you built foundations. While others chased quick wins, you focused on longevity. And slowly, almost invisibly, momentum began to form. At first, nothing changed on the outside. But inside, you were becoming someone different. Your standards increased. Your excuses decreased. Your patience grew. You stopped complaining. You stopped comparing. You stopped consuming and started creating. And people didn't notice. Because transformation happens before recognition. But you noticed. You noticed how you could endure more. How setbacks didn't destroy you anymore. how failure became feedback instead of a verdict. You started to see rejection differently. Rejection wasn't proof you weren't good enough. It was proof you were aiming higher. You realized that if everyone agrees with your dream is too small. So you kept pushing, even on the days when progress felt non-existent, even when doubt tried to creep back in, even when old voices resurfaced. Because by now, you had learned something crucial. Quitting hurts longer than discipline ever will. You had tasted growth. And once you taste growth, you can never go back to comfort. Then something unexpected happened. Small results appeared. Nothing dramatic. Nothing viral. Just enough to confirm you were on the right path. A small win. A quiet breakthrough. A moment where you realized, this is working. And that moment changed your posture. You stood a little taller. You spoke a little less. You focused a little more. You didn't celebrate publicly. You didn't broadcast progress. You protected it. Because you understood something most people don't. Early success is fragile. So you guarded your routine. You defended your time. You respected your process. And the work intensified. You refined your craft. You sharpened your skills. You corrected mistakes instead of ignoring them. You became a student again. You studied failures, yours and others. You learned from those ahead of you. You listened more than you spoke. Ego stayed quiet. Hunger stayed loud. And with each disciplined day, the gap between who you were and who you were becoming grew wider. You started to outgrow rooms, outgrow conversations, outgrow people, not because you thought you were better, but because your direction was different. And that's when the loneliness returned. But this time, it felt different. It wasn't empty. It was focused. You weren't alone because no one wanted you. You were alone because your standards had changed. You no longer wasted energy convincing people who doubted you. You saved it for the work. And the work began to speak. Your consistency turned into credibility. Your effort turned into evidence. Your silence turned into strength. People started noticing. Subtle at first. They asked questions. They watched quietly. They paid attention. But you didn't stop. Because you weren't doing this for attention. You were doing this for freedom. Freedom from limitation. Freedom from regret. Freedom from the version of yourself that almost quit. You had crossed a line most never do. You became disciplined without supervision. Focused without applause. Driven without validation. And once a person reaches that point, they are unstoppable. You stopped negotiating with weakness. Stopped entertaining excuses. Stopped betraying your future for temporary comfort. You learned to do what must be done, especially when you didn't feel like it. And that's when the transformation became undeniable. Your confidence no longer came from words. It came from proof. From knowing you would show up. From knowing you could endure. From knowing you wouldn't quit. And now, something powerful was forming. Not just success. Identity. You weren't trying to be someone anymore. You were someone. There comes a moment in every journey when effort turns into evidence. Not overnight. Not suddenly. But undeniably. You don't notice it at first because you're too busy working. But one day, you look back and realize how far you've come. The struggle that once felt unbearable now feels like training. The doubts that once shook you now sound distant. The fear that once controlled you now answers to you. You didn't just survive the pressure. You adapted to it. You became someone who could handle more, think clearer, stand stronger. And that's when it hit you. You are no longer chasing proof. You are proof. Proof that beginnings don't decide endings. Proof that consistency reshapes destiny. Proof that discipline can rewrite identity. You didn't rise because someone believed in you. You rose because you believed long enough for results to show. And results change everything. Not because they make you better than others, but because they silence doubt. The same voices that once questioned you now speak differently. Some with curiosity, some with admiration, some with regret, but none with control. Because by now, you understand something deeply. Validation after success is meaningless. You didn't do this to be accepted. You did this to be free. Free from the fear of what if. Free from the regret of I should have tried. Free from the limits placed on you by people who never saw your vision. You proved that you could trust yourself, that you could keep promises to yourself, that you could endure discomfort without quitting. And that is real confidence. Not loud, not arrogant, not performative, quiet, grounded, unshakable. You walk differently now, not because you're trying to impress, but because you've been tested. You've seen what happens when you don't quit. You've lived through doubt and came out disciplined. You've turned pain into purpose. And now people see it. They see it in how you move, how you speak, how you decide. You no longer rush. You no longer panic. You no longer beg. Because you know, time is on your side. When discipline is your habit, you don't need to explain your story anymore. Your life explains it. You are the example someone else needs to see. The proof someone else needs to believe again. Not because you're perfect, but because you didn't quit. And here's the truth most people never understand. Success doesn't make you special. Endurance does. You endured misunderstanding. You endured isolation. You endured slow progress and silent rooms. You endured becoming before being recognized. And that's why your success lasts. Because it wasn't handed to you. It was earned. Now listen carefully. Because this matters. This is not the end. This is the standard. You don't relax here. You don't drift here. You don't become careless here. Because you know how hard it was to build this version of yourself. You respect your discipline too much to betray it now. You honor your struggle too much to waste it. You keep going. Not from fear, but from purpose. You don't chase applause. You don't chase attention. You chase excellence. And excellence compounds. Every day you show up. Every habit you protect. Every choice you make when no one is watching. You are no longer trying to prove them wrong. You are focused on becoming undeniable. And when doubt tries to return, because it always tries, you remember, you've been here before. You remember the nights you didn't quit, the days you showed up tired, the moments you chose discipline over comfort. You remind yourself, I am built from consistency. I am forged in pressure. I am shaped by resistance. You don't need belief anymore, because belief fades, but proof lasts. And someday, someone will look at your life the way they once looked at others. They'll say, if they did it, maybe I can too. And without saying a word, you'll have answered them. Because your journey speaks louder than motivation ever could. You were doubted. You were underestimated. You were overlooked. But you stayed. You worked. You endured. And now, you stand as living evidence of what happens when someone refuses to quit. Nobody believed. So you became proof.